In 2003, the Send and Ripley History Society was given this DVD by Mary Milner. On it is a 32-minute long film made by the Send Women's Institute in 1965. It is a digitised version of the original cine film, and its quality, unfortunately, is quite poor. Nevertheless, it provides a fascinating window into the village of Send and the WI's activities of nearly 60 years ago in two parts. Part 1 is a tour around Send by road and viewing significant houses, buildings and activities. For much of this, it has been possible to identify the locations and then to show 1965 and 2023 side by side.
Every day, many people drive through the parish of Send without realizing that they're doing so. For the A3, the historic Portsmouth Road runs through the district, and drivers speeding between London and Guildford may have little realization of the village lying just down the hill. If you turn at Burnt Common and take the road to Old Woking, then you will drive along the main village street. From the modern Catholic church at one end, past Mays Corner, which we are told soon may be demolished and rebuilt, past the parade of shops, through a modern housing estate, past the New Inn, over the cart bridge, to the charming little Congregational church at the other end. But turn off this road at Cartbridge, and there is the River Wey, flowing through its water meadows, afternoon strollers wandering on its banks. Anglers, dangling hopeful lines. And the tiny, partly 12th century church of St. Mary the Virgin, which legend relates was built of stone brought up the river by monks in flat-bottomed boats. One bright May morning, the congregation ends the Rogation Tide service in the churchyard.
Like most English villages, Send is a mixture of old and new. That Send was mentioned in the Domesday Book, and a number of ancient houses, some dating back to the 17th century, still survive. The old manor house, Send Barns, its distinctive chimneys silhouetted against the sky, Old Keep House, Willingham Cottage, contrasting with these are the houses of Send Hill. Many built since the Second World War, modern and labour-saving. And the Saddler's Arms. And houses at Burnt Common not yet completed. Planning permission has been given for Stringham's Copse to be cut down and for a housing estate to be built there, where the Nightingale was recorded for the BBC and where the nightingales still sing on warm summer nights. The name Send is a corruption of sand, and the village has its foundations upon sand, which is still dug for building purposes. This is one of the natural hazards with which gardeners in the neighbourhood have to contend. Another is a plague of pigeons. This one seems to be carrying its food supply around with it.
Many of the inhabitants of Send travel daily to London. Those whose work lies within the village are engaged mainly in commerce or in horti or agriculture. Both animal and arable farmlands surround the village. But progress marches with giant pylons across some of the fields. The beautiful local gardens are catered for by well-stocked nurseries. and acres of market garden crops are grown for local and London markets. In spite of its mainly agricultural nature, there is one area of industry in the village, at the river's edge along Tannery Lane. Here, big lorries load and unload. And crushing mills treat materials from faraway romantic places. Here, gum arabic from Arabia is crushed and sorted. And in this big storeroom, other resins are being unloaded, ready for the mill.
Part 2 is a record of WI activities in 1965. This film shows an abridged version of the original footage.
In May, some of the members of CNWI were joined by members from Ripley and Burton in an art day held in a members' garden. This was a great success, as we were fortunate enough to have as tutor Mr. Hooper from the Brighton School of Art. His helpful criticism was greatly appreciated, and the final picture gallery showed how much we all learnt during the day.
Within every institute, there are a number of groups. Send is particularly proud of its fine choir. Our drama group enjoys entertaining the Institute 2 or 3 times every year.
In 1965, their main production was The Six Wives of Calais, a colourful period piece. Here, members help each other into their elaborate costumes for a dress rehearsal held in the open air. The cost of making this film was financed from funds raised at a coffee morning held in the spring in one of the 17th century houses, Elmsley Farm. In Mrs. Milner's delightful garden, members and their friends relaxed with a cup of coffee and good conversation, followed by a stroll round the flower beds. Mrs. Cleverley, the 1965 president, was our Albert Hall delegate. Here she is, suitably hatted, leaving for the AGM. Outings are always eagerly looked for. The coach makes a round of the village, picking up members from various vantage points. We usually stop for a cup of coffee about 11. And back on the coach, smiling faces testify to the pleasure of all concerned. The beach at Brighton is stony, and the wind can blow from the east, but we are not daunted. We are enjoying our day out. A cup of hot soup or coffee is a comfort not to be despised by some, though other brave souls dare the chill of a grey sea. And an uncomfortable scramble back to their deck chairs and shoes. The dread of every secretary is always that someone will be left behind. Here she is anxiously shepherding her charges back onto the coach for the trip to Sheffield Park. Later in the year we went to Windsor, where the high spot of the afternoon were a short trip on the Thames River bus and a visit to the Kennedy Memorial.
The committee meets at least once every month to arrange programs and deal with business and correspondence. Here we enjoy the sunshine of an open-air committee meeting in the President's garden while discussing details of the following month's produce show, held at the drill hall where most of our meetings are held. There were a most satisfactory number of entries for this show: eggs, fruit, vegetables and flowers in luscious abundance. The judges, Mrs. Artis and Mrs. Tuddiford, were most complimentary. A picnic hamper was the Greenfield group competition. Our entry gained second place. As a memento of Jubilee year, we have embroidered a tablecloth with our names to be sent to our New Zealand link, Apiti. Mrs. Norris, a former president, was one of the first to add her name. And Mrs. Rhodes, the 1963-64 president, is adding hers to the by now almost completed cloth.
However many other activities we enjoy, the monthly meeting must be our most important WI engagement. In June we held a garden meeting. The weather was kind in spite of an ominous forecast and a depressing morning. Chairs are set out to await the arrival of members and guests. Promptly at 2 o'clock the President rings her bell, and after welcoming the guests, Jerusalem is sung. One member is celebrating her golden wedding this month, and a handsome bouquet is sent to her from her fellow members. To the Secretary's consternation, an error is noticed in the minutes by Mrs. Sex, and this must be corrected. Mrs. Gillett is adding her name to the outings lists. And Mrs. Woodward Smith from West Clarendon gives us a most interesting report of the first day of the AGM at the Albert Hall. Our own delegate completes this report with her account of the second day's proceedings.
Mrs. Dear reads the W.I. poem by C.D. Lewis, her Welsh blood moved by the second stanza, recounting how the Institute
nagged for piped water and electric light. We nagged for a school bus. We ran the authorities ragged till we got what we wanted. You take my meaning? The countryside needed a good spring cleaning.
Miss Milner was fortunate enough to attend the Royal Garden Party on our behalf. Elegantly attired in her garden party outfit, she showed us her priority parking X, her ever-to-be-cherished invitation, and relished the telling of how children's toys were found in the garden and of Surrey's brilliance in obtaining 2 cups of tea before the hoi polloi. This completed the day's business, and we can sit back, relax, and listen to Mr. and Mrs. Kitchen, who sing traditional songs to a guitar.
By this time the wind has risen, but we brave it and enjoy the opportunity of wandering around the garden while taking part in the competition, a simple list of the plants growing in the garden. Our guests join in this competition with some youthful assistance. This entrant has listed over 80 names, but the winner, Mrs. Winterflood, has achieved over 130 and well deserves the prize. Our garden meeting ends, so does this film, which was devised and photographed by Sonia Deer.
With the close cooperation of Evelyn Capel and Wendy Lefkovich. Derek Deer was an additional cameraman. The commentary, recorded by Walter Withy, was spoken by Evelyn Capel, Mavis Cleverly, Sonia Deer, Dorothy Evans, Wendy Lefkovich, and Marjorie Seck.